mentioned last time these little books, if you can get your hands on these books, they're very handy. I gave mine away to somebody, I'll never get it back probably. Didn't enjoy it. That's fine. They're very good books and very helpful. All right, and then we mentioned this website last time. It's very interesting too. There's a lot of really reputable stuff here, and biblicalArchaeology.org. You don't have to take notes or anything. You can just check this out later online if you are curious. Okay, but I was able to. There's a lot of different ways to go with finding information and sharing with you guys, but we're just going to, again, just dip our feet into a few interesting little things that will basically increase our faith as well, encourage us, because the Bible is not just a book, it actually is reality. So this is that guy's channel, Expedition Bible. This is just one of many out there, but this guy actually goes the extra mile. He shares a lot of Bible verses as to why this is important, what we're looking at. It's pretty neat. So this is the name of his first video that he ever made about 9 months ago. And we're going to just go through it with screenshots and stuff. All right. So in Jordan, there is this place called the Tel Deir Allah. And you can see that mound of dirt up there. Well, that used to be, whenever you have a tell like this, it's basically a city, an entire city, and a city that was built on another city and another city. You dig down through it, you find all the remains of those cities, and you can date where you're at in the tell based on, the pottery, because pottery doesn't really burn up that well, does it? It remains even after a fire. So they tried to do what's called parallels for the pottery. They find pottery from another site where they know the date of it, and then they can say, okay, well, we're at this layer because we're at this pottery, because it changes all the time, the designs, the styles, and all that, so they can date it by the pottery. Pretty fascinating. So here he is walking up this high incline, as you can tell. And here he is at the top of the incline at this place. And walking through, these are places that have been excavated in the past. And since they were excavated many years ago, then erosion happens, the dirt comes in, the rain comes in. It covers up some of the excavations, right? So here he is talking about what was found here at this place. And there's a nice little overview of what it looks like. It's quite large. And these mounds are everywhere in the Middle East, everywhere in Israel. But the fascinating thing is when you get to Babylon, which we'll get to in 2 weeks probably, there's many tells just in the town of Babylon. And each one is like a building, not a city, but just a building, because it's so gigantic. Pretty wild. So here's a little bit of information for you. We tried to pick a background that would make it more easily to be read, more legible. All right, so it's a raised mound marking the site of an ancient city. This particular one in 1967, there was an excavation found with what's called the Deir Allah inscription. I may not pronounce the stuff right, that's fine, you get the point. It doesn't have to be the proper pronunciation. As you know, the Pentateuch were by Moses, and the guess is that Numbers was written between 1400 and 1440 BC based on the chronology of the Bible. They work in reverse, and they really fine-tune it so they have a really good idea of exactly when these things were done. And then we're going to go to Numbers chapter 22, which is a little bit hard to read, but Numbers chapter 22, verse 1, it's talking about the children of Israel when they were coming into the land. They pitched in the plains of Moab on this side of Jordan by Jericho. Let's see if I can get this a little sharper. Who knows? That's probably not the best. That might be a little better. All right. Thanks for your patience there. So we just highlighted a few of the parts of this chapter in Numbers chapter 22 because it actually talks about what they found here. Pretty fascinating. Verse 4, it talks about Balak, the son of Zippor, was king of the Moabites at that time. All right, the son of Zippor. Verse 5, he sent messengers unto Balaam, the son of Beor, to Pethor, which is by the river, the land of the children of his people. So the king sent out a messenger to go to basically this person because he wanted this person to curse the Israelites, which were now in his territory. They were a threat. He was scared. So he wanted this guy to give cursing What happened instead is this guy, moved by God, tried to curse the people, but he actually blessed them 3 different times, which is really an interesting story there. But that Balaam character, we're going to find out more about him. Verse 6, he's asking him, "Come down therefore, I pray thee, curse me this people, for they are too mighty for me." Verse 12, and God said unto Balaam, "Thou shalt not go with them, thou shalt not curse the people, for they are blessed." Okay, so in the 1960s, this guy called H.J. Franken started on the excavations here, and there was an necropolis, is what they call this particular site. The walls of the temple at the top had caved in, collapsed. And inside there, they found pieces of the plaster from inside of the wall. Even though the wall was down, they could actually read the plaster that was on the wall. Pretty fascinating stuff. And there was red and black ink. And it's currently displayed at the National Museum of Jordan today. This is another view of the top of it there and what it looks like being dug into. All right, now check this out. That's a plaster. Okay, you can actually read what's on there. So, what was on there? A bunch of little letters, a bunch of little items. And as we go through, you can read all that stuff. It talks about these sayings of Balaam, son of Beor, the man who was a seer. Wow. The same guy from the Bible, who was in this exact same area, the Bible tells us. That's pretty fascinating. And you can't really dispute it because they scratched it right off the temple wall. Pretty wild. And remember, this is way back in the book of Numbers, years and years and years and years ago. So in case you're having trouble believing the Bible, there is an abundance of evidence. We could spend months and months going over just what's been found so far. It's pretty fascinating. All right, so Numbers chapter 24 talks about Balaam, the son of Beor, as said. Verse 10, Numbers chapter 24, and Balak's anger was kindled against Balaam, and he smote his hands together. And Balak said unto Balaam, I called thee to curse mine enemies, and behold, thou hast altogether blessed them these 3 times. Pretty neat that this person's name just happened to be preserved in the Bible, and we just happen to find his name. So let's move on to something else. Okay, so there's another picture of it and the surrounding mountains nearby. Okay, let's go to the next video here, searching for the earliest mention of the Israelites' God, Yahweh. Remember, in Hebrew, it was Y-H-W-H. There were no vowels in the Hebrew. We added the vowels to the name just to make sense out of it because it's mentioned many times in the Bible. This is the guy whose videos we're going over, and we only have time to go over about 3 videos in this lesson. I've got a whole nother lesson on just one video. And so this is the guy, Joel P. Kramer, and he does a great job because he actually tells you what he found and tries to link it to the Bible. And he actually goes there a lot of times too. And he'll talk about all the different people that dug at the site in the past and what they found. Yahweh is mentioned in the Old Testament over 6,800 times, just in the Old Testament. So now we're talking about something different, right? Going on to another video. There was an Egyptologist named Donald B. Redford who excavated a place called Solib. Solib is in Sudan now in Africa. It's right south of Egypt. It used to be in Egypt, but now it's in the country of Sudan. But they found something there. The site was excavated in the 1950s. They found a late 15th century BC inscription. We're talking BC, before Christ. As you know, people say BCE these days because they don't want to acknowledge Christ whatsoever. And then AD, of course, in Domini, the year of our Lord. They found hieroglyphics on this inscription. Pretty neat. Now, 15th century would be, the late 15th century would be like 1410 or so BC. So you have to, centuries are weird like that. You have to think about what I'm talking about. Check out this place here. This is what they were able to excavate years and years ago. Remember, many years ago, 1950s. Well, let's go there. They found this. There's a lot of pillars there that they dug up, and they found this on a pillar. And what does this stand for? This is the time that the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness. So, that's what they found in hieroglyphics. Talking about the Israelites, who at this time could be known as nomads, because they were wandering around the wilderness still. And Yahweh is mentioned here, way back. So let's carry on. He's going to go there, and he's going to see for himself. What can we find here? A whole bunch of these guys, right? Pillars. Now, back then, the person that made this wanted to boast about his triumphs militarily and about who he had conquered. So, as you go here, you can look and you can see, to this day, you can walk there and see inscriptions, carvings on the pillars. And this was made by Amenhotep III, this particular place, also known as Amenhotep the Magnificent or Amenhotep the Great. He was the 9th pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. On the pillars, there are images of people with their arms bound behind their backs. We'll see them. And hieroglyphics depicting the names of the people which the leader is bragging about having defeated. This is over 3,400 years old. 3,400 years old, the end of the 15th century BC, when the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness. This is something of his visage there. You can go and find these statues for the particular rulers. Amenhotep III. Check this out. Do you see the guy's arms behind his back, and there's a string around his arms representing he's bound there? Pretty fascinating. And there's an inscription right below there. This is not the particular one. This is just another one, because these are all over. This is one that's easily seen. So we look at it there. He's pointing it out. But then he's going to walk over to this other one where the Yahweh was found. He's going to walk way over here. And this is a picture of that. Let's go back here. He's pointing to the place where this one's at, and then you can see a nice little image of it. And that is what it looks like. So there's the image. That's what it looks like. I'll try it again. There it is. And there you can see. And then we can look at what it stands for. Land of the Nomads of Yahweh. Pretty fascinating. So he's sitting here beside it. You can still go there today. You know, a lot of stuff has been taken to the British Museum, so you can't even access it anymore. They're hauled off to, museums. All right, this is another video. The 10 lost tribes of Israel, are they really lost? Meaning, did they get completely annihilated when they were captured, whenever they were destroyed? Remember, there were the 10 northern tribes, and they were the part of Israel, the divided kingdom. After the death of Solomon, the United Kingdom was divided. And now you got Judah and you got Israel, the 10 tribes. So the 10 tribes were hit first by bad guys, and they were either killed or hauled off to slavery. And some of them escaped, and they fled to Jerusalem. So Jerusalem increased by 15 times during this time. 15-time increase. You can dig down on the western hill, we're going to talk about, and you can find all these hastily made places of housing for all these refugees that were fleeing for their lives because their towns were being destroyed systematically by the bad guys. And they had to actually make a larger wall to encapsulate the western hill to keep these people safe because the bad guys were going to hit there next. So, pretty fascinating. That's a brief little overview. The Assyrians had attacked Damascus, north of them, and the nation of Aram. After this, Aram was gone. That was it. That's what they normally did. They didn't haul them out captive. Then they went to the northern 10 tribes of Israel. They laid waste. And then some of those people fled to Jerusalem in what's called Judah, right? All right. So here we see a little arrow of them coming down from the north. The red part is the 10 tribes. The orange part down there is where they're heading. That is Judah. They're going to get a little respite, but eventually they're going to come after Judah as well. And Jerusalem is way down there in the orange part. All right, so let's zoom in a little bit here. That arrow is getting closer. Should we be worried? Should we, run or something? Because they're destroying towns one by one. I think they're going to come to our town next. So we see that little that little gray box with the little red marker. That was the capital of the northern tribes. They were heading there. And let's zoom in further. It looks like they're actually going to come there. So we're not safe, guys. And as they did, people were terrified. All right, let's go on to 2 Kings chapter 17. 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 5. Then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land and went into Samaria and besieged it 3 years. Samaria is the northern tribes, so they really went through it. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria and placed them in Halal and in Habor by the river of Gozan and in the cities of the Medes. So they were taken captive. And there's another video we'll talk about. As they were carried away, what happened to these people? they actually found something in Babylon talking about the captured king from one of these conquests and how they were allocating food for the captured king within Babylon. And they found that written on a tablet there. Pretty fascinating, but we'll get to that, I don't know, months from now or something. He's got a video on that too. And it basically proves that the king really did get taken alive to Babylon. This was a wicked king, and the wicked king of the enemy actually spared his life, and it's pretty fascinating. All right, so let's carry on here. Micah chapter 2, verse 12. I will surely assemble, O Jacob, all of thee. I will surely gather the remnant of Israel. I will put them together as a sheep of Bozrah, as the flock in the midst of their fold. They shall make great noise by reason of their multitude of men. He was using this passage to talk about the people fleeing, the refugees fleeing, but really he's talking about later time as well, when God's going to bring his people together and protect them. They were not going to be lost forever, though they were going to go through some adversaries. Check out this little guy that was found, because it has a description that says, as to Hezekiah the Jew, he did not submit to my yoke. Remember, he was the ruler. This was another name for the ruler there of the northern tribes. I laid siege to 46 of his strong cities and conquered them. And this is him bragging, the bad guys, bragging about conquering. And it's right there on something that was found. And let's zoom in. Look at the intricacies of that. How long would it take a person to fill that up? That's pretty well. Can you have more? Pretty well. Isaiah 36, verse 1. Now it came to pass in the 14th year of King Hezekiah that Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the defense cities of Judah and took them. And the king of Assyria sent Rabshakeh from Lachish to Jerusalem unto King Hezekiah with a great army, and he stood by the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field. So the bad guys are right there, and now they want to take Judah, and now they want to take Jerusalem, and they've already besieged and taken over the northern kingdom and their capital. So here is where they came from. On the right there you see where Nineveh is. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Babylon is over 250 miles away from Nineveh to the south. But Nineveh is where some people think now that where the Hanging Gardens actually were. Pretty fascinating. It was a gigantic town. It would take you 3 days to walk across it, apparently. Just gigantic. And the same with Babylon. We'll talk about later. But you see they're going, see those mountains up north in Asia Minor, Turkey. You can see just how high those mountains are. And then as you go, you see that red arrow is going right through some other mountains near Lebanon, modern-day Lebanon. But they're heading down to the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee. You see that little blue dot at the top there is the Sea of Galilee. The Jordan River connects it to the Dead Sea, which is down below. And the Dead Sea is near Jerusalem. So let's zoom in. Okay, they got through the mountain area. They're, essentially the arrows are showing us the journey. But there's a Sea of Galilee it's pointing at, and then below that is the Jordan River, which, was parted like the Red Sea. I think it was twice it was parted. One time when they stepped in there with the priest holding the Ark of the Covenant. Fascinating, because they didn't have a strong wind blowing all night, did they? And the neat thing about the strong wind with the Red Sea is, the Bible mentions that the water was standing up on both sides, which is pretty fascinating too. And that strong wind blew all night too, but the dry land, it's quite a miracle. We don't have to understand it, do we? We just have to believe that God can do whatever he wants to do with his creation. Okay, so here's Judah, and see the Jordan River to the north of it there, and to the right of it is the Dead Sea. Jerusalem is right around this area, and here's some other little maps just to show you some interesting little things, like where these towns used to be in the Bible, and where Judah was. You can also see the 10 tribes and the other tribes, the 12 tribes, and where they were located at. And it changed when the kingdom was divided as well. All right, so we don't have to go through all these things, but it shows us Jerusalem there, and it shows us where Jericho's at, Samaria up there. Alrighty, there's another way to look at it. And just wanted to go through a few of these guys. Sea of Galilee is right there. Nazareth is over there. Samaria is on that side of the Jordan River. Jericho is hiding there. And Jerusalem And Bethlehem. Notice how Bethlehem's not too far from Jerusalem. Pretty neat. Notice the Fertile Crescent area, the Tigris and Euphrates. Notice Nineveh's way up there on the Tigris, way over there. And there is Damascus, way up there with the mountain ranges of near Syria and Lebanon. Here's some neat little things. How high of an elevation are we? Well, Hinton is about, if you just Google it, Hinton is 1,400 roughly feet in elevation. Jumping Branch is 2,297, depending on where they took this at. Nimitz is 2,500. Winter Place is 3,600. Spruce Knob, the highest point in West Virginia, is 4,863. Mount Zion, within Jerusalem, is 2,500 feet. So about our height. Pretty neat in elevation. Temple Mount within Jerusalem was right about the same, 2,428. Mount Hermon in Israel, the highest point is 9,232. Then there's Mount Lebanon, and that's 10,000 feet. The Great Ararat, the highest point in Turkey, is 16,946 feet. And, Ararat comes to mind because of the ark that, after the flood, came to rest there. Then Mount Sinai, Jabal Musa is where the tourists go. It's 7,497 feet. But there's been a lot of evidence proving that this other site is a really good contender for Mount Sinai. It's farther away, and there's a lot of evidence that's been found there. It's pretty fascinating stuff. It's called Jabal al-Lawz, and it's 8,460 feet. All right, let's get back to it. In 1969, the Israeli archaeologist named Naaman Abagad started excavating the Western Hill. That's where the refugees went to, the Western Hill part of Jerusalem. These hastily built places when it increased by 15 times. They found these homes there from the refugees. The occupation began at the period of the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom. So they dated it, and it links up to exactly when the northern tribes had to flee. Pretty wild. Remember, pottery is a really good way to date stuff. The Jerusalem population quickly grew by at least 15 times, and let's carry on. This is what he looks like. In 2 Chronicles chapter 32. All right, verse 5. Also he strengthened himself and built up all the wall that was broken, and raised it up to the towers, and another wall without. He had to not only the king there of Jerusalem, Hezekiah at this time, he had to not only strengthen the wall, but build further. So here's what Jerusalem used to look like before the refugees came, okay? And here's what it looked like when they came. They had to encapsulate all this to protect them from the bad guys. So they had quite an extra wall to build. All right. And this is what you can see in the 1970s. This is Hezekiah's wall. And you can go there today, you can still see the wall. And there's a guy walking on the wall. It's quite gigantic. And it's still there today. Again, Sennacherib was the king of Assyria. Hezekiah was the king of Judah. And they were coming for him. And Sennacherib had a southwest palace at Nineveh in Syria. It was called the Southwest Palace. We'll talk about that later. We could get into more detail. We don't have time for that. The palace was eventually burned later on after it was, trying to be rebuilt. And this is where you can go in the British Museum, and you can see these things that were taken from that Southwest Palace there. And if you turn to the right, so here we're looking down, let's go to the right here, and we see some intricate stuff. Let's turn to the left, we see some more intricate stuff there. Very fascinating facades that were placed on this place. Let's zoom in. And if you zoom in to that wall right there, you'll notice that not only did they include people and boats and military to try to talk about their conquest, there's even fish on there. They put little fish all over. Who has time for that? Wow. And there's just a whole hallway of this stuff. And this was common. Just line the great halls, talk about all of our conquest. Fascinating stuff. Okay, so we're going now from Jerusalem and how that, we showed the map of that, to where the bad guys live, because we're always concerned about the villains later, right? Okay, so at the bottom left down there, you see what's called the Southwest Palace, Sennacherib's palace, that today has been excavated out. There's these other places in the whole proximity of this place, like Ashurbanipal's palace, the Temple of Nabu, the Temple of Ishtar, and we'll talk about that probably in 2 weeks, because we're actually going to travel to Babylon and see what's left there, what remains, what's been rebuilt by Saddam Hussein. When Saddam Hussein was in power, there were some bricks from Nebuchadnezzar who had built up some of these places, and he had stamped the bricks, so you can actually see on the bricks they were made by him. And then there was a lot of devastation in Babylon. But then many years later, Saddam Hussein tried to restore some of the glory of one of these temples, and he put bricks on top and he stamped them with his name there, so we would know this is his work. And he didn't get a whole lot done, but he wanted to restore some of the glory of Babylon. All right, so let's look at this Southwest Palace. We're going to zoom in. There is the Lakeish room where they bragged about their exploits, a fascinating little room there. And some of that stuff's been hauled off to the British Museum. There was a throne room in the courtyard. And this is a picture of what the palace for the bad guys look like, roughly. This is another estimation of what it would be like. And there's been a lot of representations of it. So it's quite impressive for this gigantic place. And this is a picture of the ziggurat and other things here that were built to protect this gigantic, gigantic homeland of these guys. The ziggurat there was supposed to be like 7 stories high. Some people think it's where the Tower of Babel actually was created, because this is, the Fertile Crescent. This is where, remember, around there is where Abraham was called out from when he was Abram. He was called out of Ur to go to a different place, and pretty neat. Okay, we'll talk about that later. 2 Kings chapter 19 talks about this. Now, they had prepared themselves to battle these guys, but God was going to take care of them at this time. And it came to pass that night, 2 Kings 19:35, that the angel of the Lord went out and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. That's 185,000 bad guys, the Assyrians. The angel of the Lord, and when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. I would consider that a miracle, right? If you were planning to be killed or hauled away. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh. Nineveh, the Southwest Palace, where he liked to hang out, different than Babylon. But Nineveh was quite a gigantic place. So it's easy to get the two different places confused, but that's fine. And it came to pass, as he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch his god, that Adramelech and Sherazar his sons smote him with a sword. It's not really a good thing when your sons kill you, right? So, yeah. It's not a pleasant thing. And they escaped into the land of Armenia, and Esarhaddon his son reigned in his stead. So the king did not get to take over Judah, did not get to capture Jerusalem. Jerusalem was going to be captured by other people, but not at this time. Let's go on to Jericho. This is a fascinating one. We may not have time to cover much of this, but the town of Jericho. Now you can go to where Sodom and Gomorrah used to be. Remember, Sodom and Gomorrah weren't going to be built on. It was going to be a desolate place after the destruction by God, right? You can go there, and maybe later time I can show you what that looks like now, because there's nothing living there. It's total devastation, and you can actually dig out sulfur balls right out of the wall, and you can burn them today. And it's pure sulfur. It's different than any sulfur found on Earth. It's a completely pure version of it, because remember the fire and the brimstone, right? It's pretty wild. And there's many people on YouTube that actually went there themselves and shows them, and here I am, and here I'm digging out some more balls, and here we're going to light them on fire. And you just see devastation, total devastation, where Sodom and Gomorrah used to be. But this is another place, Jericho, that got destroyed, right? God took care of the walls of Jericho. They walked around it. And how did God destroy it? Well, what have they found? All right. So it was, it's called now the Tel Es Sultan, different Tel. Way back in 1868, this guy named Charles Warren worked on it, and then in 1907, 1909, and 1911, the Germans got to it, and they tried to work on it. They made a lot of progress. Ernst and Sellen and Karl Watzenager. And then in the 1930s, 1936, John Garstang got there. Now, John Garstang believed in the Bible and believed that this reflected the Bible. But here's the problem. In the 1950s, this lady came, and she became famous in archaeology. She was really good. She invented ways of going through the layers of tells and stuff. And as you can tell, she became a dame. Her name is Kathleen Mary Kenyon. But she made a critical mistake we're going to talk about when she was dating this place. So she thought that the destruction of Jericho took place 150 years before the Bible said it did. So in her mind, then it didn't link up. And though there was an earthquake and a fire in the town, and she attested to that, she made a mistake. And the reason was, we can talk for a second here, she was looking for Cypriotic pottery from Cyprus. So she was digging through there. She got to the layer that had been totally burned. It's obvious there's like a 3-foot layer in this place where you can tell it's been totally burned. Not only that, but there's a bunch of pottery full of grain, and the grain is all burnt in the pottery. And why is that important? Well, we'll maybe get to that here. We don't have too much time. But when the Israelites crossed over the Jordan River in the Promised Land before they hit Jericho, they celebrated Passover, and it was a time of harvest. Because harvest in this area, even today, happens in the springtime. And this town had just taken up all their wheat harvest before the Israelites got there. And they put it in storage. And that's exactly what we see. We see tons of burned harvest in pottery in this 3-foot layer all across the tell that just reflects exactly what happened. And they can even pinpoint what year it was when the Israelites went over there. Pretty fascinating stuff. Now, she was looking for some pottery that was Cypriotic, but what they did find, they found pottery with the parallel pottery thing I was talking about, where they find pottery that matches other sites where they know the dates. That worked. They found pottery of the land, of the Canaanite pottery, that made it evident it was the exact time it was supposed to be when the Israelites came over, when this destruction of this town happened. But they also found counterfeit versions of Cypriotic pottery. That means they had seen the pottery and they had made their own version of it. But she just ignored that. Now you can only make a counterfeit if you've seen the real version, right? Which means it could have been 150 years before this time, because obviously, so she made a mistake, and this is why we have to talk about it. And the person that she worked with is going to be interviewed. They flew him back here, and he has to acknowledge the fact that yes, it is obvious that she mistakenly dated this place 150 years earlier than it should have been for this layer. And because of that, to this day, there's a bunch of people who believe like her that, oh no, that's not the Bible's account of this place is not why it, it's a messed up thing. So here's Garstang, the guy who actually, believed what he was seeing. And here is Mary, Kathleen Mary, who was a brilliant person, a lauded person, but she was looking for something that wasn't there, and because of that, made some mistakes here. All right. This is a historian that believes like Kathleen. It could have been the case. This person believes like Kathleen, and this person as well. It couldn't have been how it really happened. But the next person does believe it, and we're going to talk about, he's going to go to the site with this guy, and he actually believes the Bible, and he actually wrote a dissertation on exactly why Canaanite pottery, and including in this location, works. It's pretty fascinating stuff. Now, there was a guy named Peter Parr who worked with Kathleen, and that's Peter. And there's Peter way back when he was working at the site, and this is what he looks like today. He came back, and that's what he looks like there. And he talks about when he was digging with Kathleen way back in the 50s. And then this guy is able to talk to him about what this other dissertation chap has discovered and why it really totally is lining up with the Bible. This guy is not a strong Christian, not a real religious person, but he has to admit that everything lines up. And there's another picture of Kathleen, and there he is, same picture on the right. And then we get back to Brian Wood, and he did his dissertation on this late Bronze Age. This is a picture of the pottery there, for example. And there's a sign of the Tell of Jericho. And this is an example of another tell on the left that has not been excavated. They're all over the place. They've been trying to excavate all these different places, these different sites. So they're talking, and then they're talking with the other guy from the 1950s who came back. Then he proceeds to make a cake to explain how a tell has many layers to it, and you have to dig down, and if a layer is burned, it's quite obvious as well. This is pictures from the 1950s when they were excavating Jericho. And there's another picture from that, and another picture of that. And you can dig down, you can see a skeleton there. And you can see a bunch of interesting little things here. You can see a bunch of bricks. We're going to talk about this later, because we've got to get ready for the time. All right, we'll pick up here and see how much more we can cover. And thank you for your great attention.